It is the day after the dust has settled. 26 billion in tax rises, a smorgasbord of changes, freezing of tax thresholds, a cap on salary sacrifice schemes, grabbing most of the headlines this morning. Better than expected growth this year. There is a little bit of good news in all of that, and certainly a lot of speculation that at least some of the measures announced yesterday might never see the light of day, of course, because they come in right as we head to another general election. We're going to dig into quite a lot. Thank you so much for the questions that you've sent in, but I'm delighted that we have Dan Coatsworth, Head of Markets at AJ Bell, and Charlene Young, Senior Pensions and Savings Expert at AJ Bell, here to try and answer as many of your questions as possible. You can enter a question in the chat box to the side. Please try to make them as general as you can. We cannot give advice, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to reply to you by email to your questions if we don't answer them on this webinar, but we may well use some themes for the upcoming Money and Market podcast for a more in-depth look once we've unpacked everything. And check out the podcast for Dan and Charlene's immediate reaction to the budget yesterday, the Money and Markets podcast. You can find it on AJ Bell's website or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you prefer an article, we've also got one of those. We've got a great breakdown in the news and insights section of the website. Okay, with that, I am going to crack on. I have to say we've had some fantastic questions, a real breadth of budget smorgasbord subjects to dig into, Charlene. So I hope you're both hungry. I'm going to start with pensions because that really was the biggie. And it's something that we've had a lot of questions about, Charlene. So I'm going to start with this one on salary sacrifice rules. It's from Amy. She says, I normally pay in more than £2,000 into my pension each month. Will I be capped at 2,000 under the new salary sacrifice rules?
Right. Oh, thanks, Amy. So I think it's probably worth running through what was announced and how it might impact pension savers. So salary sacrifice, for people who aren't aware, is a way of exchanging some of your pay for a benefit, in this case, a pension contribution. And the reason lots of employers like this and might enter into agreements with their employees for it is because it saves them national insurance on the amount of earnings you give up. Employers pay national insurance at a rate of 15%, so the saving on offer is quite considerable. For employees, you also get a benefit as well. You could save national insurance on what you give up to 8%, or it could be 2%, depending on your level of earnings. What was announced yesterday was a cap on the amount of money that you can give up and still get these full national insurance exemptions, so both you and your employer. So from April 2029, so quite a long way off, there will be a £2,000 cap on the amount of money you can give up for those exemptions. So salary sacrifice can absolutely continue. You could, if you are in a scheme and you are saving, sacrificing and saving considerably more than that cap, continue to do that, but there will be a national insurance charge for you on the excess amount. So that might be 8% or 2% if you earn over £50,000. Your employer is going to get 15% employer charge. So the hit is on both sides, but significantly greater for employers. I'm assuming, Amy, that you are in a salary sacrifice scheme, but I think the main message, regardless of whether you're in one or not, is that pension contributions will still get income tax relief. There's no changes announced to tax relief in the budget. What you pay in will still be free of income tax, whether you are in a salary sacrifice scheme or not. So what does that mean? Pension contributions still reduce your taxable income, so that might pull you out of higher rate tax, which we now know is going to be frozen, that threshold, until 2031. It could pull you out of various tax traps that we have in the UK, so things like the child benefit tax trap for people earning over £60,000, or that £100,000 tax trap where people start to lose their personal allowance. So none of that is changing. Pensions are still really the best tool to combat those tax traps and frozen allowances. As I mentioned, I think the change isn't due to come in until April 2029. That, according to the government, is to give employers time to adjust. This is quite a seismic change for people offering those schemes. If you were a cynic, you could say that it might never see the light of day. I'm not suggesting that you plan on that basis, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, but August 2029 is the latest date a general election can be called. So, you know, it's a long way off. Anyone who's watching, if you're not sure whether you're in a salary sacrifice, bit of a tongue twister there, scheme or not, speak to your employer. And by all means, if you know you're in one and you're worried about what these changes might mean for you, still speak to your employer. They'll be digesting all of this, working out what it means for them and their business. But really, there was a lot of panic about it, and it is a big change for employers who offer these schemes. But the main message is pension contributions still really, really tax efficient.
We had a follow-up on that from Neil, because Amy there was talking about quite significant pension contributions. He says he has a pension scheme. His employer contributes £75 a month, £900 a year. The scheme is set up on salary sacrifice. He sacrifices £125 a month, so £1,500 per annum, a total of £2,400. Will he be caught up by the new rules?
It doesn't sound like it. So if I'm right, and you mentioned that the value of his sacrifice contribution is £1,500, that is under that new cap. So Neil, yeah, please don't worry, you wouldn't be caught by that cap. I think if you're looking for kind of a ballpark figure who it might impact, if someone's paying in the kind of employee minimum under auto enrollment, which we'll call 5% broadly across your earnings, and you're doing that under salary sacrifice, you'd need a salary of around £40,000, 5% of which is £2,000 that you're giving up. So that's kind of the ballpark figure. We talked about a lot about, you know, middle income earners in that speech. You know, there's change now. We've gone from who are working people to who are middle income earners, and according to these rules, it's around about £40,000 a year.
You're absolutely right. The latest date for a general election is Wednesday, the 15th of August, 2029. So there we go. We're going to stick with pensions, and I'm going to keep you talking just for a little bit. Dan, we will get to you, I promise. We've had a question from Roger who says, can you compare and contrast drawing pension income from a SIP or an ISA, and any thoughts on minimizing tax?
Oh, okay. So on the very face of it, pension income, once you've used up your tax-free cash allowance or your tax-free lump sum allowance, let's assume you went into drawdown. Income from drawdown is taxable, so it's added to your other income, and it's the first slug of income that uses your personal allowance, and then any tax bands as you go up. Withdrawals from ISAs, whether you take like natural income from your investments as and when it is generated, or you take capital withdrawals, are free of income tax. So big change there. And I think, you know, there was no changes to pension allowances either on the way in or the way out beyond the salary sacrifice stuff in this budget. But back last year, when Rachel Reeves announced that unused pension pots could become subject to IHT if your estate was big enough, lots of people with larger pension pots sort of panicked and thought, oh, hang on a minute, shall I switch from this kind of conventional wisdom of drawing down from my ISAs first because it's tax-free, I'm going to make the most of those tax allowances on offer? Do I then suddenly just switch and turn on my pension drawdown, or turn up that income tap? It really depends on your personal circumstances, but my view generally is that a blended approach works really well. So you've got that tax-free slug that you can take from the ISAs, but you know, if you really are worried, especially about inheritance tax, you might want to turn on that pension income. You know, the main message again when it comes to pensions and IHT is, you know, your pension is there to spend on yourself. Please make sure you don't run out of money yourself in retirement, but I do take on board that people are worried about those future pensions and IHT changes in April 2027. Excuse me, I think I've got a frog in my throat as well. Another thing, age 75 is still quite an important date in pensions. So if you're approaching that age and you still have some tax-free cash allowance left to use, it makes sense. Again, I have to speak generally, I can't give advice, but it makes sense for most people to have used their pensions tax-free cash now by the time they get to age 75 for a variety of reasons, but mainly kind of what happens to your fund when you pass away if you've got anything left in there. This is a huge topic, I guess. I mean, I could probably do a whole webinar on it, and it's something I definitely want to tackle in some additional content, whether that's videos or articles. We've got a retirement hub that we're building for people at and in retirement, all the things that matter to them, including estate planning as well. The one thing I would say as well, just thinking off the top of my head, if you are worried about IHT, and you're worried about tax efficiency, speak to an advisor. They can help you make a really good plan that suits you and your personal circumstances down to the ground.
Charlene, we've got quite a few questions coming in about salary sacrifice, and Louise, Simon and Ian, I'm going to get to those, but I'm going to give you a chance just to pause and take a look at those. And Dan, I just want to ask you about the triple lock. There was a lot of talk before the budget about scrapping the triple lock. Do you think that will ever seriously be considered?
Well, for those perhaps who don't know exactly what it is, so the state pension goes up by the highest of 2.5% inflation or average earnings each year. So that's the triple lock. I think the question about whether could it ever be scrapped, that very much is a political decision, and I think that the government's very aware that they don't want to upset sort of older people. They've made sort of slight mistakes along the way for the current government, and so I think it's a very, very sensitive issue. So I think that they probably look to try and avoid this issue if they can ahead of a general election. I know you say the general election is not for a little while, but the pensions minister has recently said ruled out scrapping triple lock guarantee. But I think they can't keep kicking it down the road. At some point, I think they're going to have to address it, but they will try to avoid making any sort of firm commitment, yes or no, for as long as they can.
Shannon, I'm going to go back then to a couple of these salary sacrifice questions that we had.
Yep.
We've had one from Louise. We'll do a bit quick fire because otherwise I think we'll end up doing the whole webinar on pensions. There are lots of questions on it. Louise asked, does the rule about salary sacrifice apply to SIPs?
It depends what scheme that you and your employer use. So, for example, it would, to me, I use salary sacrifice and I use that through a SIP. It depends the structure of your workplace pension. So again, please speak to your employer. It doesn't automatically apply to the contributions you might make outside of your workplace. So, for example, you might have your workplace pension scheme and then a SIP to like top things up, perhaps towards the end of the tax year or your business year, depending on how you like to structure things. So again, if you are using a SIP as your kind of what we call a qualifying workplace pension, then potentially it could affect you. But generally, for most of our SIP customers, this won't catch them.
Okay, we've heard one from Ian who says, what's the impact on the company pension contribution limit?
Right, so yeah, there was no change here to the general amount that people can pay into their pensions, so what we call the pensions annual allowance, and nor that was there a change to the tax relief rules. So that allowance is £60,000 for most people, and it covers everything that's paid into pensions for you, whether that's yourself or your employer. So lots of people who run their own companies like to make employer contributions. This is separate to salary sacrifice and shouldn't be affected. Now, these contributions, as you'll probably know if you're already making them, need to be for what we call the purposes of trade to get tax relief. And tax relief for employers or companies, I should say, comes in the form of corporation tax relief. So the amount that you are paying in as a business to pensions can get taken off your bottom line. And that means you don't pay corporation tax on those profits. So also one thing that was impacted potentially by this in the budget, it's a really good way for directors to make contributions and potentially, avoid some of those dividend tax hikes that we did see. Because if you're paying the money straight into your pension, you get corporation tax relief, and then you're not also drawing out as dividends further down the line. So we might see small business company owners really looking at pensions at, beyond the salary sacrifice changes as a way of extracting money from their businesses in a really tax efficient way. You can tell we're live.
I'm going to come back, and I think that you've answered Simon's question there. Simon, if you're still on and Charlene hasn't covered everything that you wanted to know, do just drop us another question in your chat function. I will come back to pensions, but I'm going to give you a chance to catch your breath. Dan, ISAs. Question here from Asher, who says, I've always put the maximum allowed into a cash ISA each year. If the allowance is falling from 20 to 12,000, What are my options for the remaining 8,000 that I would normally have put into a cash ISA? I think a lot of people will be wondering this.
So from April 2027, the government says it will cut this allowance, like say, from a cash ISA from 20,000 to 12,000 if you're under 65. If you're at 65 and over, there's going to be no changes. So let's I presume that if you're under 65, the question is what do you do with the 8,000 you would have put into a cash ISA? Well, you have various options. Obviously, with an ISA, one of the key benefits is that everything, all the gains you make, are protected from the tax man. So if that's a key reason why you use an ISA, obviously you can look at stocks and shares ISAs. Now, it might be that some people are a little bit risk averse. They're a bit scared to go into investments and think, okay, well, maybe I've always stuck with cash, and so, but I still want to get the most out of it. So stocks and shares ISAs, the allowance is not changing. That's staying at £20,000. Now, obviously, as Charlene said earlier on, we're not here we can't give advice, but there are some lower risk cash-like returns you can get from various investment types that you could hold in a stocks and shares ISA. So I think sort of awareness is slowly growing around these, but I think it's fair to say your average person may not know exactly how they work. So we've got lots of good stuff about this on our website. If you want to read about it, but I just sort of point you towards a few products which might give sort of cash-like returns as sort of an alternatives to perhaps for you to research further. One is money market funds. These have investments in short-term debt like bank deposits, government loans. These are very, very short-dated stuff, very liquid things. Bond funds. If you're looking at these, you need to look at the sort of how long these bonds have got left in the portfolio until they mature. So you really want to get sort of shorter duration funds. They're less sensitive to interest rate changes. Equally, you can invest directly in sort of bonds, particularly if you want to go for those sort of the lower risk end. It will be the shorter dated bonds, particularly to look at, or something called treasury bills, or sometimes called T-bills. Now, here will be UK T-bills, which is effectively it's where you'd lend money to the government only for a very few months. They typically run for like 1, 3, or 6 months. So here with these sort of products, rather than paying interest, you actually they're sold at a discount, and you essentially get your money back at face value. So I appreciate these are sort of not products which lots of people will be familiar with, but I think that they're worth having. And so do look at HFL website, particularly on our we've been writing about quite a lot of these recently. Go onto the news section and you should be able to find some more information about these.
Okay, Timothy, hopefully that answered your question as well there. Dan, we had another one from, let's see, Richard. Will these changes actually drive more money into stocks and shares ISAs, or will people just save less, or maybe use traditional savings accounts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have to go back to why has the government actually announced these changes? So for once, most of the stuff that you saw in the budget was all about changes to tax systems or allowances. Is all about raising more income for the government. Here, this is not about it. It's cutting the cash ISA limit, or that you can put in, because it's trying to sort of encourage more people to invest. So I think that the idea that you'll have less money you can put into a cash ISA. Well, I talked about what one avenue is to look at cash-like returns. I think the government would love that if looking at your investment options. But equally, I think that you might have people looking at things like premium bonds. They might just sort of say, you're right in saying in your question, you're sort of saying, will people simply save less? That is a possibility. I hope it isn't. I hope people continue to save as they can. You have to think that lots of people don't actually use up the full £20,000 allowance. But equally, if you've suddenly got this sort of situation where people are talking about the cash allowance is less, actually people might think, okay, there's a scarcity value here. They might encourage more people to put more money into cash ISAs than they did before, just because they want to make use of this opportunity to shelter these gains from the taxman. So I think the government thinks that it will be like a magic wand and you see a big increase in investments. I hope we do see increased investments, but it might not be quite as much as the government's thinking.
Again, some great questions coming in. Dan, I'm going to give you a chance to have a look at a couple on those. Charlene, I wanted to move on to talking about the lifetime ISA. There's a lot of talk about the potential that it could be replaced. And Bill wonders, what does it mean for the money that he's already saved into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So hidden in the budget documents, I don't think it was actually in the speech, was a couple of clauses about the lifetime ISA. Now, if you're a regular listener to the pod, you'll know that we sort of pointed out, including to the government, some of our concerns with the product that we'd like to be fixed. But the government's actually going to consult in the next year, early in 2026, on a potentially new product. So it will have a focus on first-time buyers, helping people onto the housing ladder, obviously one of the features of the current lifetime ISA. And if this new product does come to fruition, it looks like it will actually replace the lifetime ISA. So yeah, you've done well to kind of pick that one up. We don't know the details yet. So people who have one for potentially retirement savings, like myself, Bill, I don't know if you've got it for retirement savings or saving towards your first home. But you know, we will be looking at detail in this for sure. So yeah, a bit of a watch this space at this stage. We don't know exactly what any new product would look like, whether it will come to fruition. But yeah, the government really does need to make sure that existing lifetime ISA savers and investors are looked after.
And Cole had one on this very subject as well, because there had been a lot of speculation beforehand that maybe that they would look at changing the maximum amount of the house purchase price that you could use your lifetime ISA for. Do you think this may be considered in this consultation?
I think it definitely should be. I believe it will be, because there has been many, as I say, many kind of concerns identified with the current offering, this being one of them. You know, people like yourself being priced out or facing having to withdraw their funds that they've saved and invested and got the bonus on, and then face that government penalty charge if they aren't going to meet that £450,000 limit on the property they're buying. So yeah, definitely, you know, we will be making representations to ensure that the kind of new house limit, if there is one on this new product, is fair and represents, you know, people who are trying to use the product for its purpose to get on that housing ladder.
Dan, we had a question from Maya, and obviously we were all watching market reaction quite avidly, not only when the Chancellor took to her feet, but also before it, when we had that leak from the OBR, which was just absolutely extraordinary. And Maya asked, how have markets reacted to yesterday's budget?
Well, it was, you know, I think everyone was caught off guard by this. So we saw probably more, I reckon we saw more movement in the half an hour before the Chancellor actually got to give her speech than we saw during it. So big wild movements initially in gilt markets. You know, gilt prices actually went up, yields went down. Stock market wobbled a bit. I think people are going, oh, crikey, what's going on here? But as the Chancellor spoke and people had time to digest things, the sort of the headroom that Chancellor's got, the fiscal headroom, it was better than expected. And you know, whilst there was sort of slight disappointment with, you know, economic outlook, I think overall the fact that we didn't have an absolute disaster, there wasn't any big surprises, so much being trailed beforehand that markets took it in their stride. Things like banking shares did very well. Gambling sector shares didn't do as well. There was some bad news, a bit, you know, higher duties, but overall, I think it's a big relief. And I think people look back to sort of what happened with previous Chancellor and, you know, and sort of the negative reaction with the previous government, chaos there, and I thought, you know, the fact we didn't get that again was deemed very good. So I'm very relieved. I'm sure everyone watching this is relieved that we didn't have a big market wobble.
I just want to touch on a couple of tax issues, Charlene. We had a question in from Yahuwah who said, any changes in gifting rules and IHT?
No, a pleasant surprise. So again, there's so many rumours and leaks, weren't there? but one of them was that we would see a tightening of gifting rules. So what people can give away from their existing wealth in their lifetime. At the moment, you've got various allowances and various time limits. So a popular one you might have heard of is something called the 7-year rule. So where you make a large gift, and if you survive for 7 years after making that gift, it's completely out of your estate. So no, in short, we did see a small tweak to something that's coming down the line in relation to IHT that I mentioned before, and that's unused pension pots. So not due yet, not due until April 2027. My personal view, I should say, and it's still a terrible policy. The administration of it is just an absolute nightmare. I don't think anyone expected those very generous tax cuts to maybe stay forever, but the policy and the way it's being implemented has been described by various people, including the founder of this company, as a bit of a dog's dinner. So we saw a small tweak to what happens if somebody was to pass away after the April 2027 implementation date, and their pension would be included for IHT. If there's tax to pay, there's a small tweak to the administration of that and how that can be paid from pension funds, which could ease things, but overall, no big changes to gifting rules and IHT for those people who were concerned about that. Well, one thing I should say, actually, we did see that the overall nil rate ban, so that amount that everybody can leave without IHT coming into play, that £325,000, we already knew it was going to be frozen until April 2030. That freeze, like a lot of things, is going to be extended for a little bit longer. So to tie in with the other tax allowance freezes and threshold freezes, that nil rate ban will be stuck until April 2031.
Dan, let's talk about income tax. The pitch was rolled and then it was unwound again with the speculation that there would be a hike to income tax. But there were tax changes, that lovely stealth tax that we often talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, there was this chatter, wasn't there? Like 1 or 2p increase in income tax, and then that wasn't going to go ahead. I think people went into it thinking, okay, we're going to be free of it. But yeah, you're right. You dig deeper, it's like, oh, there are some stuff. So this fiscal drag thing, people are talking about this stealth tax. So what's happened here is that the Chancellor came out and said, like, I'm going to keep freeze on your allowance, certain allowances, and essentially what that means is that actually, if you get a pay rise, you might find you're dragged into a higher tax band because these allowances haven't changed. Obviously, that doesn't apply to everyone. It's just if you're just below a sort of tax band, you get that pay rise, it tips you over. These allowances are now extended, they're frozen until 2031. So it's definitely something that people should think about. Obviously, the government quite likes it. It's a nifty way to raise money without having these headline increases in tax. But it's not really just the tax and your earnings that would be affected if you moved into a higher tax bracket. Obviously, your personal savings allowance shrinks as you move up. And of course, there's the government did come out and say that we're actually going to change a sort of 2% increase, 2 percentage point increase on savings, property and dividend tax. They're all going up. So yeah, so I think we had these sort of headlines saying, don't worry, the Chancellor's not going to sort of go back on her manifesto pledge of not changing income tax. Well, we had a load of other tax changes, and so we're always annoyed by having to pay more tax here, but it really is worth just sitting down after perhaps this weekend and just sort of say, what does it really mean for me? There's quite a lot of stuff. So I think even if you think I've got a very straightforward plan. I put some money into the stock market every month. Do look to see your personal circumstances, how you might be affected by this, because I reckon it probably affects a lot of people.
Yeah, Andrew was just asking how that additional 2% tax would work on dividends and savings.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you get allowance with dividends, you can have up to £500 worth of dividends a year where you don't pay any tax on it. Obviously, if you hold investments inside an ISA or a pension, they're sheltered from the tax man. But for example, if you've got a dealing account, investment account, so once you've used up that £500 allowance, you then pay a tax on your dividends, and the rate of tax depends on whether you're a basic rate taxpayer, high rate, additional rate. So that dividend tax from April 2027, not next year, but 2027, will go up by 2 percentage points just for the basic rate and high rate, but there'll be no change for the additional rate there.
Charlene, I said I would come back to pensions, and I am going to come back to pensions because they're always one that gets people going. We've had one from James. There was a rumour that pensioners may have to pay national insurance. Nothing on that.
Yeah, no, that was, yeah, you're right. That was a rumour that was being bandied around, but no changes here. People over state pension age will still not be liable for national insurance.
We're going to do a bit of a quick fire with these. Yeah, any changes to auto enrolment?
Oh, right. Auto enrolment. Nothing explicitly. You know, we have said repeatedly it would be good to see those kind of minimum contribution limits ticked up and that band of earnings that people pay those auto enrolment contributions on to kind of help boost people's savings for retirement. There's there's adequacy concerns, but there's also concerns, people are suffering still from the cost of living crisis. So it's quite a nuanced argument. Auto enrolment, it sort of it's a catch net for people. It defaults them into pension arrangements and default funds, even if they choose to do nothing. So if you were someone who wasn't particularly engaged with a pension when you join a new company, you will typically get automatically put into a pension scheme. If you do nothing, then the contributions will be automatically put into the default fund choice of the scheme. So whilst there were no kind of explicit changes to auto enrolment rules, the salary sacrifice proposals might impact what your employer is paying in and the arrangements of that further down the line. I think for anyone in an auto enrolment scheme, check what's on offer, speak to your employer. You might be better off, it depends on personal circumstances, but with a different investment choice. That default is just the default catch-all. It's not for you and your circumstances. So have a look at what your scheme offers, check if you're in the default, check if you like the look of something else that may be better suited to you, and also speak to your employer. I've mentioned auto enrolment and minimum contributions. Lots of employers offer the potential to match higher contributions. So rather than the kind of basic minimum, which is 3% from your employer and 5% from you to make it 8%. Lots of employers actually say, well, do you know what? If you put in 6%, if you can, we'll match that to 6%. So that's 12% going into your pension fund rather than 8%. So yeah, extra free money potentially on offer. So make sure you speak to your employer.
And we've had one from Linda, and she's asking specifically about her circumstances, so I'm going to make it more general. Okay. If you were planning to take a tax-free lump sum soon, a full amount, is there anything that was in this budget which would potentially make you rethink?
Yeah, so Linda hasn't taken it yet, she's thinking about it, right? So, well done for kind of resisting the rumours. Obviously this year seemed worse than ever for rumours about what was going to happen to pension tax-free cash. I think we thought we'd seen the worst of it last year. So nothing in the budget to change the amount you can take tax-free, so up to 25% for most people with that lump sum allowance ceiling, so that's just over £268,000. So thankfully no changes. The Treasury did sort of brief newspapers that there wouldn't be changes to this about a week ago. Better late than never, I guess, on that front. If you have a plan for your tax-free lump sum and you need it, then by all means think about taking it. We're not sat here as a hypocritical pension provider saying don't access your pensions, but it's really important that there is a plan and a need behind that money, because whilst it's in the pension, it's in that lovely pension tax wrapper where you can access up to 25% of it tax-free. But what I would say, and I have to be careful how I phrase this, don't just plonk it in the bank, if you like, where it could be taxed, potentially at higher rates of saving tax now if it's not wrapped in an ISA, and you'll potentially miss out on future growth if you don't need it. I think I might have mentioned age 75 earlier. It's weird. It used to be such a pivotal age in pensions, and then it sort of fell away. But it's still important. If you're approaching 75, Linda, and you haven't taken tax-free cash in, for most people, it tends to be a good idea to use that. Long story short, if something were to happen to you after you reach 75, your beneficiaries wouldn't be able to take money out of, they inherit from your pension tax-free. So almost if you take it before 75, it generally is the general consensus to do. If you're over 65, potentially when this restriction on cash ISAs come in, you'll still get that £20,000 allowance. I'm not sure how old you are, and I probably can't comment on personal circumstances, but yeah, I think if you do need it, or you need some of it, I think actually really good point. One common misconception is that when you're accessing your pension, you have to take all of that 25% tax-free cash at once. You can access part of your pension, and 25% of that part can be paid to you tax-free, and you can leave the rest to potentially grow. So, a few options there. Have a look around the website, as Dan's pointed out. We've got some content on there. If you're thinking of a bit of a mix and match approach, it is certainly possible, but hopefully that helps.
Dan, real quick one for you on pensions, and then I'm going to wrap up the pension bits unless we've got any more questions for people who are currently listening in. From Charles, at what point will every state pension recipient have to start paying tax on their income?
Well, it looks pretty soon, actually. So obviously we know that the triple lock is going to trigger this 4.8% rise in the state pension from next April. So that takes it to £12,548. What the interesting thing is, that's only £22 below the personal allowance. So everyone's allowed to earn a certain amount of money, which is £12,570 before they have to start paying tax. So that's your personal allowance. So if you look at the triple lock, and we go back to originally mentioned at the start, which is state pension goes up by the highest of 2.5% inflation or average earnings each year. That would suggest that from April 2027, the state pension will tip over that personal allowance, and it means that that's the point at which anyone receiving the full state pension the first time will start paying income tax on it. And I guess this is another reason why people are saying, is the triple lock sustainable, or surely the government's going to have to do something about it?
Dan, we've had loads of questions in on venture capital trusts. I'm going to plough through a few of them, starting with one from Janet. Can you clarify the effects of VCT allowance on tax payable 26-27?
Oh, 26, right. VCTs I'm going to talk to you about, I'm happy to take questions about VCTs. It is quite complicated stuff. These are venture capital trusts. These are not for everyone. Off the top of my head, so what the things that were announced in the budget were a mixture of good and bad news. So Rachel Reeves kind of loosened the rules around how much money early stage companies can actually receive from these sort of venture capital schemes. So that, VCTs are going to be allowed to put more money into sort of larger, more developed businesses than before. But obviously, that. So I think the industry was quite excited about this. That sort of means that they've got a bigger pool of opportunities for them to look at. Obviously, the aim is here to sort of try and to back growing companies. So I guess that's the good. The bad news is there's going to be a reduction in the upfront income tax relief for investors. So at the moment, you can get 30% upfront income tax relief. That's going to be cut to 20%, and that's a really, really big change. So, immediately it's obvious there's a less incentive for people to be able to get, to want to get involved in this sort of stuff. And actually, I was just before we were doing this recording, I was reading some stuff from the AIC, which is the Association of Investment Companies. They represent the sort of the investment trust and the VCT industry. They made a sort of point that the last time that we had this upfront tax relief cut, where it went from 40% to 30%, the amount of money raised by VCTs fell by 2/3, and it didn't recover to previous levels for another 16 years. So to me, that's pretty shocking. My takeaway from all this is that VCT industry is going to find it a lot harder to attract people, particularly if that income tax relief has been cut to 20%.
Charlene, got a general question about how the budget will affect the self-employed.
Okay, so self-employed. I think, you know, you're not going to be caught by auto enrolment. You won't be caught by the salary sacrifice changes, but potentially the dividend tax hike. As Dan mentioned, April 2027, I believe, you're going to get 2 percentage points added to that basic and higher rate of dividends. So if you sort of structure yourself as a limited company, that might obviously impact the amount that you get in your pocket after you've gone through extracting your profit. So again, as I mentioned before, you might be looking at company pension schemes. That's if you structure yourself as a limited company. No real big change specifically affecting people who are sole traders that I'm aware of at this stage, obviously beyond the frozen thresholds and the things that we've already talked about. There was a much trailed kind of potential for national insurance to start being charged on people who operate in a partnership or a limited liability partnership. That looks like it's not coming in. I think kind of the main one we talked about, the lifetime ISA. Self-employed people quite like the lifetime ISA if they're eligible for one, to top up retirement savings. It can be very tax efficient if you are mainly a basic rate taxpayer, because that lifetime ISA money at retirement can potentially be accessed completely tax-free, like an ISA, as we know, but you have to wait to age 60. And it's a bit more flexible, isn't it, than a pension in some people's eyes. So we know that more needs to be done to help self-employed people save for pensions. So for example, with the lifetime ISA, yes, if you access it before age 60 or not to buy that qualifying first time home, you do pay a government penalty. But I think some people kind of look at the cost benefit and say, well, I'm aiming to use this for retirement, but if something does happen to me and my business along the way, at least I can get access to a little bit of that money. So I've waffled on slightly there, but nothing that I can see at this stage specifically impacting either way.
Dan, we've had quite a lot of questions about property, and I think it would be a good thing for us to potentially do a Money and Markets podcast on this in the future, but I'm just sort of aware that we're coming close to the end of the webinar. So I just wonder, what was the impact on property from the budget? You know, whether that's buy-to-let landlords, council tax, or other things.
There was quite a lot of things related to property. One is that there's this 2% rise in property income tax from April 2027, and I guess the thing that's got all the headlines is this mansion tax. So if you've got an expensive property, you're facing a much bigger effective council tax bill. It's not going to the council, but the money. It's that's kind of how you look at it. So if you've got a properties worth over £2 million, starting from a tiered basis, you're looking at an extra £2,500 up to £7,500 bill that you need to be paying. So I think what will happen is that, you know, that's coming in from April 2028. So before that happens, I imagine we're going to get some sort of revaluation properties in the UK. I was looking at some stats trying to think how many properties have we got in the UK that are worth more than £2 million? There's some sort of estimates. It's about £145,000. Of course, there's a knock-on effect here. So what does that mean? It means that, you know, perhaps, you know, anyone who's in a property like that, they might be thinking more seriously now, maybe it's time for me to downsize. I was looking to buy property in that range. Maybe I want to be buying one that's a little bit below it, so I don't get hit with this extra stuff. That's going to have an impact on the property market. And so I think it's, you know, obviously, like I say, you know, we've sort of suggested some of these policies are they're quite alarming, but they're not going to happen for a while. Who knows whether these things will change along the way? But I think it's quite a big one. And I think, you know, people look to property, and they, you know, over the years they bought a house. Lots of people love to renovate them. Lots of people invested a lot of money to do up their houses, and I think it's right that some people might feel penalised, that saying, wow, you know, I've worked hard, I've got a nice property, I've made it even more valuable by doing things, and now you're punishing me. So yeah, it's a tough one, and I'm sure we will talk about this more on our weekly podcast.
And that also answers Lucy's question, who was saying that she held shares in Barclay Group and was surprised to see them fall off the back of the budget. And of course, they specialise in those high-end homes, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, because I think when you think about house builders in the stock market, you think, okay, well, they're just buying, sort of building starter homes to up to down things. Barclays a little bit different because it's very concentrated in the southeast of England, and it's got loads of properties that it sells for 2, 3, 4 million pounds, and so of course the market's going, hang on a minute, what does this mean for demand for your properties that you haven't built yet but you plan to? Is it going to be weaker? So that was one of the big fallers on the stock market as the budget was announced. So yeah, interesting question there that you've noticed that one.
Okay, it is 1:45. Time has flown. Thank you so much for all your questions. I'm so sorry if we didn't manage to get to yours. As I say, we will take some of the themes, some of the thoughts, and incorporate them into future Money and Markets podcasts, or potentially into articles that we put up on the AJ Bell website. Just to say that the recording is going to be uploaded to the website, also on the news and insights section in the next day or so. We're going to send a follow-up email, so if you can let us know whether we should do more of these kind of Q&As or suggest some of the topics that you would like to have taken into account either for the podcast or for future webinars. And can you just make sure that you do check your inboxes and your spam just to make sure that you see the feedback email. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that has helped you make sense of what was a smorgasbord of a budget. Thank you very much.